Hi, everybody. Welcome to Week 1, Module 1, Introduction to Criminology. I'm Professor Jason Ostro, and I created this sort of video walkthrough in order to familiarize you with some of the key components of this particular chapter and this particular module. Now, keep in mind, this is a brief discussion in PowerPoint, and it is not designed to be all-encompassing. Rather, what you have to do is still go back and read the course material in the chapter, as well as address all the aspects that are within the module, including additional readings and discussion boards, as well as any other videos that are on there. So with that being said, let's get started. This particular chapter, we talk a lot about, it talks a lot about the key concepts in understanding criminology. It's an introductory chapter. It summarizes the general structure and organization of the criminal justice system, which is really important to know if you're going to study criminology because they're obviously interrelated. To identify and characterize elements that make a good theory. Criminology essentially is the scientific study of crime, and that's based off of this idea of theory and how it applies. And then finally, to identify key concepts and issues associated with victimology, okay, which is the scientific study of victim and victimization. Okay, so some of the key concepts in criminology. First one is this idea of crime. What is crime? Crime broadly is defined as a violation of the law, which is true, but it's not just a violation of the law, it's a violation of certain laws, specifically felonies or misdemeanors. So, what is a felony? A felony is a violation of the law that is punishable by more than 1 year in prison. It doesn't mean that you're going to get more than 1 year in prison, but it's punishable by more than 1 year in prison. Felonies are things like murder, rape, robbery, burglary, felonious assault, things of that nature. Misdemeanor is also a crime, but it is a crime that is punishable by up to a year in jail. Right, up to a year in jail. And misdemeanors can be things like petit larceny or assault third degree or criminal mischief, depending on the degree to which that the damage occurred. So crime really is falls under what's called offense. An offense is any violation of the law, all the way up from like murder, all the way down to, let's say, drinking alcohol in public or something like that. And crime is a felony or a misdemeanor. Now, for the purposes of this course, when we focus on crime, that's what we're going to be thinking about, crimes and deviance in general. So we're going to use the more broad definition of crime, which is a violation of the law. So crimes and what is codified as a crime have fallen into traditionally two different categories. The first one being what they call mala in se, right, which are acts that are inherently deemed wrong, evil, immoral, things of that nature, such as homicide, murder, such as rape, such as robbery. Now, what's interesting is that if you look at it throughout history, right, maybe the mala in se has changed. Maybe at one time, like in some societies, maybe some acts have been viewed as being acceptable, right? If you could look back into history and you can find that. But I think when we think about mala in se today, what we're thinking about is what does our society agree upon that is just absolutely 100% wrong unequivocally. And we could agree that, certain types of crime, certain types of offenses are mala in se based off of our, what we, our current disposition in terms of crime. So then there's also mala prohibita, and that's something that is prohibited by law. Now, mala in se would be prohibited by law as well, although mala prohibita acts might be things that, for one reason or another, may be lawful in some places and unlawful in other places. I think of recreational or medical use of marijuana as a good example. In some states, marijuana is lawful, and in other states, it's still unlawful. And so it's prohibited by law in some places. Age of consent. It's 17 in some states, 18 in others, and 16 in others, prohibited by law. Okay, so these are things that are prohibited by law, and maybe there's not a general agreement on if it should be lawful or unlawful. And you could probably think of a couple of things too. Deviance is just a general term that's used to describe, sort of antisocial, unusual, or unlawful behavior. It's usually associated with juveniles. You hear that, mostly associated with juveniles, like in antisocial behavior, juvenile delinquent, deviance, things of that nature. Drinking alcohol, staying in the park after dark, or maybe even committing a crime, things like that. Criminology is the scientific study of crime. Okay, similar to psychology, which is the the scientific study of the individual's behavior. Sociology is the scientific study of society and groups. Biology is the scientific study of the natural environment, the ecosystem, that kind of thing. All right. So criminology specifically is the scientific study of crime. So that's what we are going to be doing in this class, and that is different from criminal justice. Now, you can't necessarily have one without the other. You have to have they're sort of hand in glove because you need crime in order to have a criminal justice system, and you need a criminal justice system if you have crime, right? So they sort of are, directly interrelated, but they're different topics, they're different subjects. Criminal justice is the study of agencies and institutions that work together towards some kind of common goal, which is formal social control. Agencies such as law enforcement, agencies such as um, courts, corrections, prosecutors, probation, the study of these things, the study of these systems. Okay? That's what that is. Whereas criminology is very specific about the scientific study of crime. There are two traditional viewpoints when it comes to crime, criminology, criminal justice, and these fall under what's known as the consensus view or the conflict view. And you see this a lot in criminal justice and criminology. You don't have to fall into one camp, absolutely. It's not necessarily an either or. There's often, like a lot of things in criminology, social science, criminal justice, there's a lot of gray area and a lot of crossover. But in general, traditionally, criminal justice criminology has been viewed from two distinct viewpoints. The first one being what they call the consensus view, which you can see right there. This is where we believe that the criminal justice system and criminology represents broad social agreement on what is right and what is wrong, that punishment is just for violators of those norms, those offenses, what is right and what is wrong. Whereas the conflict view comes from the perspective that the law, the system of government, the system of formal social control represents the wealthy and the powerful to the at the expense of the poor and the victims and so on and so forth. Maybe as a result of racism, maybe as a result of economic prejudice, let's just say, or maybe as a result of any number of other things. Just the conflict between classes. Now, again, there are theories and there are perspectives that adhere to both of these. However, you don't have to necessarily fall into one definitive camp, right? You'll see that there's often a lot of gray when it comes to some of this stuff. Okay, so what exactly is criminal justice then? And some of you here may be criminal justice majors, and I want you to really think about that. Can you answer the question if you were to go home and tell your parents, I'm majoring in criminal justice? Well, what does that mean, right? What does that mean? And that's something you have to be able to answer. So criminal justice system is the apparatus that society uses to enforce standards of conduct. Okay, and it's a system of formal social control. Formal social control. When informal social control breaks down, there's formal social control. It's through crime prevention, crime control measures, prevention, and to provide and maintain some level of justice. Now that is a barrel of information there. What does that mean, justice? Well, it means depends on who you ask, under what circumstances, when you ask them, right? I mean, it can mean many different things to many different people. So it's a loaded question to an extent. But the general purpose of criminal justice is formal social control. Okay. So the structure and organization of criminal justice is often presented as three distinct but interrelated components. These would be law enforcement, courts, and corrections. When you think about law enforcement in the United States, they're different. They exist on different levels of government as a result of our federalist structure. So at the very, very, quote unquote, top of that structure, you have the federal government, federal law enforcement agencies like the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, Homeland Security. These are agencies that have jurisdiction throughout the entire United States. Okay? Below that, if you will, are what are known as state agencies, and there's 50 states, and it's also territories. But the 50 states, each state has its own model of law enforcement, and but most have sort of this state enforcement mechanism, like state police, state troopers. Maybe they have environmental police, state environmental regulators. Maybe they have other state authorities that their jurisdiction exists throughout the entire state. Like in New York State, the New York State troopers have their jurisdiction throughout the entire state of New York. It's an example. Then they might have states might have agencies specific to other tasks like highway patrol or, like I said, environmental protection, park protection, things of that nature. And then just below that, what we would call local law enforcement, okay? Local police, local law enforcement. This is about 90% of all law enforcement in the United States exists at the local level. These are places that fall within the state, such as cities, towns, villages, and counties. So, this is St. Joseph's University, and we have county police, we have town police, we have village police, we have all these different layers of policing here, even just in Suffolk County. So you get a sense of, how robust the local policing, local law enforcement is in the United States. Courts, they also exist at different levels of government. Much of that has to do with the offense that is committed. So if it's a federal offense that the defendant may be going to, a federal court, but generally most crimes are committed are state offenses, offenses against the state. So that's why you have like somebody who's arrested for assault. It's the people of the state of New York versus, okay? Okay, what is the function of the court? So the function is, to determine guilt, to apply legal sanctions like maybe probation, parole, not parole, excuse me, probation or fines or imprisonment, incarceration, things of that nature. Also, to an extent, courts serve to ensure the due process rights of the defendant to an extent, and that's why they have all these hearings, grand juries and preliminary hearings and things of that nature to determine if evidence was seized lawfully, unlawfully, things of that nature. Okay. And then finally, you have corrections, which deals with jails and prisons, probation, and parole to an extent. Probation is one of those agencies that sort of exists at different levels of the criminal justice system. They have some law enforcement mechanisms. They report to the courts to a certain extent, and they also have this sort of corrective aspect to it. It's very interesting. But corrections. So it's interesting. It's called corrections and not punishment or something, right? So the idea is to correct, but that's a philosophy that maybe has changed over time, and different people have different views on that. So the three main components of the criminal justice system, as opposed to criminology, are law enforcement, courts, and corrections. So this leads us back to the idea of criminology, and again, the chapter talks about this. What is criminological theory? And it's criminology itself is using the scientific method, the model of science, to explain, explore, describe, and apply mechanisms to reduce crime. Okay, and most criminological theories seek to identify variables, cause and effect, that can explain crime. Okay, explain crime. And so, like all good theories, they have to be characterized by certain things. Parsimony meaning it needs to be sort of simple in design and make sense. Okay, simple in design. Scope, it has to be, it can't be too broad. There are some theories that attempt to describe all kinds of behavior. Like, and they call those general theories, like general theory of crime, general strain theory, things of that nature. But that's very hard to do. Generally, theories are very narrow in their scope. They try to explain a very specific type of behavior. Logical consistency, they have to make sense, right? There are certain aspects of it that have to be intuitively correct. It has to make sense on its face. It has to, if two things go together, and we make the claim that A causes B, well, then A has to come before B. Like, deterrence, harsh punishments deter, the death penalty deters violence. I don't know if that's true or not, right? But we'll just, as an example. So the death penalty deters violence. So the death penalty has to, come before necessarily, like this idea of deterrence has to exist before somebody commits an act, not for the particular person, but like in general, if we're explaining it in terms of like generalized deterrence. It also has to be testable, which all science, the scientific method requires that theories and research is can be replicated, right? So if a researcher, based off of their data, finds something and they say, "Wow, I have found that crime is caused by this," Well, as another researcher, I have to be able to replicate what that person does. It has to be testable. I have to replicate it. Okay, and it also has to have this idea of empirical validity, which when you get into research methods, you get into this idea, but it has to be objective, factual. It has to be based off of observation and data and logical consistency and all these other things. Okay, so theories in general attempt to determine causality. Why is A causing B, or how does A cause B, right? The theories, and like all social science theories, to an extent, they inform public policy and programs to reduce crime and deviance, such as why do you have police officers on foot patrol all over? What informs that? Like, how does that prevent? Does that prevent crime? Why do you use camera systems in banks? Why do you have people, police doing undercover operations? So these all inform in this idea of, criminology and public policy. And then the last part of the chapter talked about this idea of victimology, which is the scientific, as you probably inferred, the scientific study of victims. All right, and that's it. That's sort of a branch of criminology, or subfield of criminology, if you will. So the scientific study of crime victims, and there are a number of theories that victimologists will study, or criminologists will study. One of them is known as the victim precipitation theory. And as you read the chapter, I want you really to think about that. And because there's often a lot of controversy when it comes to this idea of somehow blaming the victim for their being victimized under certain circumstances. And I want you to think about that as you read about the victim precipitation theory. Also, incidence and prevalence of crime victims, trying to look at why is this person repeatedly victimized, or why is people in this demographic repeatedly victimized? What's the relationship between individuals who commit crime and individuals who are victims of crime? Also, victimologists look at victim compensation and restitution, and then, of course, the impact of these victim impact statements on punishment. Okay, so that's about it. Again, this was just a broad overview, and I just wanted to go over some of the main topics and key ideas and explain some of them. But still, please go back and make sure that you read the entire chapter. And there's also a variety of materials to look through and complete within the chapter for Module 1, or within the material for Module 1. I hope that you found this helpful and interesting, and I will see you all online.